Happy Christmas to you, Roy. Always good to gauge.
To you. Thank you.
Always good to gauge your view on these things. I mean, this really cannot go on, right? I mean, whatever the answer is to the pay dispute, 85,000 appointments just on the last set of Downing tools. We've seen it on previous ones. This can't continue at this rate.
No, you're right, and of course it's not just this strike. There have been strikes throughout this year. About 1 million people have been turfed off the waiting list and are now back on it, trying to be threaded back in, whilst all the time more people are being added to the waiting list. So, I mean, there's a huge capacity problem, and it's a hidden risk. I mean, the doctors talk about, oh well, we've got Christmas Day cover and strikes, and we've got consultants in A&E and all the blue light front doors covered and all the rest of it, which is true. And fingers crossed when I say this, no one's dropped the ball at the front door. But what's happening now is you've got people whose clinical need have got them on the waiting list and got them to where they are on the waiting list. They get turfed off, and some of them have been turfed off for more than once. I mean, I spoke to a guy who'd been turfed off 5 times for a hernia operation. And of course the clinical need then accelerates and the need is amplified. And so then what was maybe, a medium clinical need suddenly becomes a high clinical need. And that disrupts all the other sort of 7 or 8 million people that there are behind. It's causing huge disruption. And the junior doctors know exactly. I mean, we're talking about it. They know about it. They know exactly what they're doing.
So in terms of their intransigence, as it were, I mean, what is likely to happen? We know that this is, well, we want this, they're saying no, and we'll try again, but the government say, don't worry, you've already had a pay rise, you've got a bit of a pay rise, it's never going to be 35%. Where does it go, Roy? Are we going to carry this on for the next couple of years?
Well, God, I hope not. Look, I mean, if I was dealing with it, this is what I would do to the approach. I mean, the doctors won't talk all the time. The government won't put a deal on the table. The government won't put a deal on the table all the time. There's strikes in the offing. Now, we've got this next tranche of strikes coming up. These are the last strikes that the junior doctors can call under this mandate, because they can strike for 6 months and then they have to reballot their members. So that would almost certainly reballot unless a deal can be done in the intervening period. Now, junior doctors lose a lot of money when they go on strike because the BMA, despite being the third richest union, I think, in the country, they don't pay strike pay. So, we've had a big tranche of strikes. There's a 12% deal on the table. Maybe, I don't know, the junior doctors, maybe they won't vote for more strikes, in which case the deal will be just paid and that'll be the end of it. But the negotiated way out of this is for everybody to say, right, okay, let's start again, clear the slate. What can we do over, say, 3 years to do some pay restoration? Because it is true the junior doctors' value of their pay packet has been lost over that 10-year period. Now, that's because the BMA have been dozy and asleep at the wheel. They've let their members' pay just kind of drift. Now, they will say, oh, we were dealing with a difficult government and all the rest of it. Well, to hell with that. It's the union's job to fight for their members, and they didn't. That's why these junior doctors started an organization called Doctors' Votes. And they've been very clever. They've taken over all the regional committees, and they now have the say on the Grand Council of the BMA, which is the ruling council.
Right.
They've done a bit like Momentum did it with the Labour Party. And that's why the BMA has suddenly gone from a dozy old geezers club into a militant left-wing trade union. And that's what we've got to deal with. But I think a 3-year deal would probably be doable. And from the politics standpoint, let's face it, we're not going to have a Tory government next time round. They can dump them costs into Labour's lap and let them get on with it.
True. Speaking of Labour, I noticed the Labour MP Jess Phillips tweeted this earlier, Roy. It was reference an A&E visit. She says, I spent last night in A&E as breathing appears to have been evading me a little. I'd say that Jeremy Hunt should spend a night there before he wades out his plans for inheritance tax, because the last thing we let him be in charge of was as breathless as me last night. I assume she's talking about the health department, which, of course, Mr. Hunt used to run.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the inheritance tax thing is a totemic thing in taxation. I think it's less than 4% of people of estates are bothered by it. It's easy avoided with tax planning and insurance. And I think by 2035 it goes up to about 7%. So it's a small tax, but it is totemic. And clearly, the Tories will try and make something of it. The interesting thing is, when Jeremy Hunt was Secretary of State for Health, he used to regularly work in a hospital. He'd do shifts at weekends and things like that. I know because I've been there and I've seen it. So, I mean, I used to call him the Tinker Man because all he could do whilst he was the Secretary of State for Health was tinker with it. He had no money and no time in Parliament to change any of the laws. So he just tried to fiddle about with safety and got nowhere with it. But yeah, I mean, there is no question that I think come the election, the NHS will once again be part of the battleground because the pressure will be on. What are you going to do about waiting lists? Now, I mean, the issue with waiting lists is quite interesting. About 60% of people on waiting lists are there for a diagnostic, and only 20% of them will actually need overnight healthcare in hospital. That's for an operation or what have you. So if the NHS has a clear run at it, it can roll up its sleeves and waiting times will come down quite quickly, which is why Rishi Sunak made that promise. And if you cast your mind back right to the beginning of this year, when there was a window with no strikes and the COVID thing had petered out, the NHS got the 2-year waiters down to almost nothing. So it can do it. It just needs a clear run at it. The problem is a week-long strike ricochets through the system for about a fortnight before the strike and about 3 months after. It's just so disruptive.
Indeed. Listen, Roy, it's always good to get your take on these things. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your new year. Roy Lilley, former NHS Trust